Hey everyone, my name is Rich, and this is Rich Talks Records, episode 4, and this is part 3, and the third part of the epic Black Flag trilogy, as we now go into our, I think, 5th hour on this band. This has been the video equivalent of the blasting concept, but it's another beautiful, bright, sunny morning, and we will see how long it takes to wind our way through this one. Not really anything carried over from the last video. What I did want to just take a second and talk about is in 1980. So in early '85, the band was largely off the road because bass player Kira Rosler was attending UCLA. And so the band was trying to design their touring around her school schedule. And one of the reasons that they had toured so hard in '84 was not only were they putting records out, but the Olympics were in LA that year. And, Black Flag always attracted a lot of heat from the cops. And so one of the brainstorms of Chuck Dukowski was, screw it, you guys are just going to be out of town the entire time. The Olympics will come and go, and you will have never been here. So that was one of the reasons that they toured so hard. And the other thing that, they toured hard in '85 and '83, but one of the things, their touring schedule would be like 90 shows in 100 days. It was just these exhaustive excursions. And there's a lot of famous lore around how Black Flag toured. So one of the most famous examples is they would go to the all-you-could-eat buffet at the Sizzler, and instead of bringing up a plate, they would bring up a tray, and they would just fill the tray with food and eat from that. The other thing that they would do, and Rollins has talked a lot about this, is they would go and sit in a fast food place and sit in a booth near a family. And when a family, like if they wouldn't finish their food, the members of Black Flag would run over and grab the food they didn't eat and split that among them. Rollins has talked about, sometimes his mom would mail him money. She'd mail him like $10 or something, and he would get a Snickers bar. And the band members, if he had like a little bit of chocolate on the corner of his mouth, he'd be like, "Where's that? Where'd you get that chocolate from?" Mike Watt tells the famous story that, and you'll see this in photos of the band, that they just had 2 big bags of laundry, clean clothes and dirty clothes, and every band member would just grab things out of the clean bag to wear. So you will see, if you look at enough photos of them, you will see sometimes Bill has this one shirt on, sometimes whatever. So, and the other thing, and I'm surprised it's taken me this long to touch upon it, but Black Flag as a touring band, what they were doing was largely unprecedented. The only sort of comparison that I can think of would have been like soul groups on the Chitlin circuit, but this is like the Chitlin circuit didn't exist for underground punk rock bands. So they largely built that and started to create relationships with people, but it was a lot of hard going, and they really were, as a lot of other people have said, kind of Johnny Appleseeds, just going out into the country, and they played at every podunk place, every bar and VFW hall and cobbled together venue that sort of wasn't really a venue. Fugazi did that in the 90s, but it's interesting because with Fugazi it was an aesthetic choice, and it was part of rejecting corporatism and places that would only charge $5, and it was all these sort of aesthetic decisions. Black Flag was just trying to get gigs, and and anywhere that could take them. And it's kind of funny to think about because the paths of the groups are so wildly different. But in 82, 83, 84, the only other band that had any sort of underground cachet that was touring that much in America was REM. They were the other sort of Johnny Appleseeds playing pizza parlors and stuff. So it's funny to think that those two bands who wound up being so ridiculously influential were kind of the first ones out at a lot of these places, you know. And some of the other bands that toured at that time, like Dead Kennedys or TSOL, have talked about the phenomenon of that. But, you know, even then, they tended to be, you know, driving through Wyoming. Whereas I think if Black Flag could have gotten a gig in Wyoming, they would have done it. You know, like, they just sort of said yes to everything. So I think that's one of the important things about them that needs to be sort of said. The other thing is, by 85, I don't know about 84, but definitely by 85, they now had their own PA. And all these years, you know, yes, there was Mugger and there was Merrill, but, you know, Merrill had bands. Merrill had stuff going on. And Mugger was now co-running SST. So, you know, Black Flag were largely, even if they had other people on the road with them, Black Flag were largely their own road crew. So, you know, they're rolling in this busted up van, and people would attack the van and break off parts of it and vandalize it. You know, they've got this fucked van that they're dragging across the country. And then, you know, they're rolling in, and then they've got to, you know, and if they're like touring in the South, you know, they've got to do the load in, play the gig. Greg, by that point, is playing in almost all the opening bands, you know, and then they're loading out, and then they've got to drive, you know, whatever, 20 hours to the next show. So that, you know, Rollins has talked about what an exhausting life that was and how it kind of breaks people. They lived, you know, they lived hard lives, and they lived hard lives in service of making this music and disseminating the music of all of the incredible bands on the label. So early 85, the band is basically off the road, and they are doing shows periodically as Black Flag Instrumental, and then sometimes Rollins is showing up to do spoken word. So, you know, in this period, Rollins and Dukowski were something of a double act as far as both doing spoken word. There's footage from that period out there. I recommend checking it out. And I think Dukowski in particular was great at it. And I don't think that he carried on with it, and he should have, because he's very engaging, very smart, very funny. And, you know, what Rollins was doing back then was like a very much a prototypical version of what he evolved into doing the talking shows. So, which I've seen, you know, several of through the years. So, but in early 85, they're largely off the road. There is a fascinating series of entries in Henry's Get in the Van book where they're off the road. And he really appears to have had some sort of, I mean, it comes off like it's a psychotic break. It wasn't, of course, but he was living at the Ginn house, and Greg claims it was his father's study. Henry calls it the shed. I think the shed might have just been a nickname, whatever. But, you know, I don't know if it was in this period, but there is the story that Rollins tells about getting very seriously hassled by the cops in the shed. And that's a long, long story. It's on one of the, I forget which spoken word album it's on, but it's harrowing. There's a lot of cop harassment stories that are harrowing with them. So there's a reason why they took the anti-cop stance that they took. But Henry was going through this, you know, I think being off the road wasn't good for him. And so he's going through this weird, introspective phase of just, really, I don't know, battling his demons. And in the writing, the demons appear to be all-consuming. And in and out of all of that, Black Flag does another period of lockout recordings, and this time, so they are at Total Access at this point, and I was gonna just check something really quickly. So they're at Total Access at this point, and that's what I thought, yeah. So Spot is not involved. I don't know what Spot was working on at that point. Spot might have maybe been doing the Husker Du records. I don't know. But in 1985, I sort of feel, and one other aspect of Mansonia stuff. SST, I believe in late 84, was actually going to put out a Charles Manson record from prison. And Rollins was corresponding with him. And apparently him and Charlie got on fairly well. And then I've only heard kind of one story about this, but from what I remember, this is many years ago now, they got a letter at SST detailing a lot of information about Kira. And somebody had been stalking her. And the implication was, if you go forward with this record, or keep going down this road, something's going to happen to your bass player. So that was it. That was the end of the Manson phase of them. And I, because I don't know the exact chronology, and I think it might have been a couple months before that, I talked a lot about in the last video about being baffled by the last song on Slip It In being You're Not Evil. It could also be their own weirdo way of saying of what the same point that Sonic Youth made right around the same time with their noise freak out Satan is boring. And I feel like there is sort of a collective, I don't know how to phrase it, lightning of spirit at SST in 85. And I think that by 84, the bands who were dark had gotten as dark as they could get, and as jagged as they could get. And like in the case of the Minutemen making Double Nickels on the Dime, that was the furthest possible extreme of a lot of their ideas. Husker Du had put out Zen Arcade, and the hardcore section of that record, which is one of the greatest sequences of music ever recorded. That was what was the story of that? They did the whole thing like in 2 days or 3 days or something. Them and Spot just just ripped it up. They had all the songs ready, but years later, Grant Hart, drummer from Husker Du, called that passage or that section of Zen Arcade gratuitous hardcore. So I think that there was, in the same way that they had sort of turned away from the more sort of pro forma hardcore identity of the shaved head and the militant whatever thing, and growing out their hair and going into all these other weird areas, I think there was a collective kind of lightning of spirit that they didn't want to try and get darker, and so, the next Meat Puppets records, the next Minutemen records, the next Husker Du records, and then the next Black Flag records are interestingly either much brighter or much more approachable. It's just it, and I think that is something that happens sometimes with bands. when they sort of think that they've gone as far out in a particular direction, there then is a redressing the balance. So all of that manifests in this, the next Black Flag album, Loose Nut, which was recorded in March of '85. This album, like The Doors' Waiting for the Sun, or like Funkadelic's Cosmic Slop, is the attempt of a very, very dark band to take a step back and not be total freak out all the time. So, but we have, things are starting to shift in Black Flag world. So, first of all, Spot is no longer around as far as being a producer for them. And this would be, this was the beginning of the end of Raymond Pettibone. So we have this very unusual cover. I did not know until a few years ago that this is apparently a decontextualized and appropriated piece of pre-existing artwork that Pettibone had done. And apparently this was a self-portrait. And I don't know what the original context of it was, but Greg and Chuck and or Bill swiped it for the cover. And so between those three, probably Greg, I would assume, but maybe Chuck as well, I don't know, grabbed this for the cover. So apparently Ray, was not happy about this. And according to the one story, that really was the beginning of the end of the relationship between the two brothers, but also sort of the beginning of the end of Ray's association with SST. So he apparently drew then a parody of the Loose Nut cover, one portraying Greg, one portraying Chuck, that was kind of real snarky and nasty about them. So those never got distributed. There's a brief glimpse of them in the whatever the series is called, the punk art series that I linked in the last video, and I guess I'll link in this one. So if you hit pause, you can, as it goes by in a flash, you can see this, and the only reason why that exists is because Rollins grabbed a copy of them and preserved them. So at any rate, we have Run Out Grooves. Yep. So that makes sense, and kind of sums up this record, but greater context will be provided later. Kickin' and Stickin', which kind of about sums things up. And then All For Me. And that's ominous if you know the story of SST. So Spot's gone. And Spot's idiosyncratic production choices are gone with him. So this is Greg. Bill Stevenson and Greg Tarling David Tarling are the co-producers of this record. This is the CD I would have purchased in the summer of 1993. So this is what I listened to all these many years. I got the vinyl copy of Loose Nut, I don't know, somewhere in the 2000s. But this has all the words. So, and the back cover image is reproduced here. The sound of this record is totally different. And if you want to talk about Black Flag and metal, or their influence on metal, I kind of think that this would be the record. And I kind of think as Sabbath-based or as hard 70s hard rock-based as the last couple records were, I think this is the record that, I don't know, would be more sort of, I guess, appealing to a metal crowd. The production is far more, I don't know, compressed, and it feels a lot cleaner. There's a lot of the vocals are not this like weird smattering and multiple voices happening at the same time. Like a lot of the elements of the last couple records really are gone. So what you have is something that, just for lack of a better way of putting it, sounds far more normal. There also is a clearer emphasis on getting Henry to sing. And so he doesn't scream anywhere near as much. And when he does sing, as I had noted before, how he was oftentimes a little flat, the flatness is kind of gone. They've clearly worked on him singing, and he does note that in Get in the Van that he recorded the song Loose Nut a lot. So Loose Nut is a song, is kind of like Slip It In, opener song, kind of the mission statement of the record. The whole record largely sounds like this. And it's more Greg sex freakiness and Greg's and sort of like weird sexual hang up, sexual anxiety, sexual addiction, perhaps, stuff. Odd song. I love it. It's great, but it's odd, and I think that it doesn't have all of the, it's not anywhere near as weird or as wild as Slip It In was. It's as much as the vocals, and I guess what's his face, Milo Ackerman sings with Henry on Loose Nut. There's a shadowy, sort of dark quality to the vocal sound, but a lot of it really kind of is this sort of bright orange. This record has a very bright orange feel. It feels like people who have only lived in the nighttime being like exposed to daylight, or have to like function in daytime hours, is sort of the feeling of this record. So, like maybe they got jobs. It feels like that. Like the freaky person having to like Slip It In and My War is them when they're off the clock and being wild, and then this is them at their job, and they're trying to like be presentable to the world, but not really quite pulling it off. So yeah, the other thing is Greg, kind of like, funnily enough, Cosmic Slop, there is a weird tendency that Greg gets into on this record to layer parts of his guitar, or sort of have two solos going on at the same time, or two fills going on at the same time, or the double tracking is just off. It produces kind of these very, I don't know, these odd sort of high-end blurs of guitar sounds, kind of like, and though it's in a far more orchestrated fashion, kind of like what Funkadelic gets into on Cosmic Slop. And I always wondered if that was sort of a way of sounding, I don't know, of like lifting things up, like, because it's not freaky and weird sounding. It's just sort of like, I don't know what it is. It's sort of just rock guitar-ish in a way that in a way that he hadn't been before. So, at any rate, Loose Nut, interesting song, interesting rhythm. It's rhythmically odd. It's very propulsive, but it's very, very strong. And then we get into Greg's next song, Bastard in Love. Now, one of the things that I think with this is Henry trying to sing more normally, I think makes him sound a little sarcastic, or a little, I don't know, like slightly smug. And especially as we get into the rest of this record, the cleaning up of his vocals and the stacking of vocal tracks in a more conventional way makes him sound sort of not thuggish, but very kind of like a character a characterization version of his man machine vibe. Bastard in Love, if we take it on a surface level, is a remarkably kind of emotionally vulnerable song from Greg in a way that he hasn't been emotionally vulnerable like ever. So it's him trying to, appeal to someone, and not him personally, but you know what I mean. The singer of the song or the writer of the song is, I don't want to be like super linear about this, is attempting to, appeal to somebody who maybe is a bit damaged or has a dodgy history. So, but the way Henry sings it, like I said, it sort of sounds sarcastic, so you aren't entirely sure of how to take some of the verses. And then when he's singing like "My Love Is Real," you're like, is it? Because it sounds sort of like, what's that Iggy song, Happy Guy? And you're like, this guy's not a happy guy. Like, what the fuck is, like, why is he trying so hard to convince us? And it's kind of, it comes off a little bit like that. The guitar solo is, though it goes into sort of some Greg weirdness, the guitar solo and even the riff and even the guitar sounds remarkably like just a guitar player in a rock band. There's not a lot of the Gregness and the strangeness and the dissonance. There's just a lot of this is buffed off and very, very, very orange. It's very orange, and it's what I've always imagined daytime in Southern California is like. So, and one thing about that, like, during the passage of when this record is being recorded in Get in the Van, Rollins talks about his daily walk to band practice and to the studio, whichever it was. It's been years since I read that. But he talks about Artesia and Aviation in Los Angeles, going down Artesia and Aviation. And he talked about it so much that I always thought about what it would look like there. And I've always had this kind of weird thing with Los Angeles because so many records have been made there. It's kind of like New York with movies. Like, you go to New York and you've been trying to imagine what New York is like because you've seen it in all these like Scorsese movies and stuff, and like or even Warhol stuff, and then there it is, but like I've had this between, The Doors and Love and Frank Zappa and then Ice-T and Ice Cube and these guys and Fear and the Germs. There's kind of a Los Angeles of the mind, because I've never actually been there. I've been to California a bunch of times, but I've never actually been to LA. So I have a relative who lives out there. And I just was asking her a few years ago about all these like locations in LA, and she was just kind of like, "Oh yeah, it's fine. It's not." Like, she couldn't understand why I'm so fascinated with the lore of certain locations. But when Google Maps got created, the first thing I ever looked up on Google Maps was Artesia and Aviation, and I actually did the walk that Henry talks about, trying to put myself in his headspace as he's walking to like practice these songs. So anyway, yeah, there's that's my stupid level of fandom. So Loose Nut and Bastard in Love, they're weirdly, again, shadowy vocals on Loose Nut, but they're very sort of bright and what I would imagine LA is like. I don't really know. And then we have Annihilate This Week. Annihilate This Week is one of my favorite Black Flag songs of all time. It is, I think it's really hilarious. I think it's a great, I think it's a great piss take. I think it's one of, and this is Greg all alone? Yes, it is. How could it not be? I think it's another great piss take of just American culture at the time and from a subcultural perspective. I think that the element of parody of trying to make it sound exactly like the chorus of a heavy metal song is like, I love that as a conceit. The gigantic gang chat vocals are hilarious, and the sort of round robin of Kira and who else is in there? There's a whole bunch of them. Oh yeah, so it's Bill Stevenson, Milo Aukerman, Dez. I don't know who Louis is. Rollins and David Tarling and the Addams Family. Again, I don't know who Louis is, and I don't know who the Addams Family are. But the round robin at the end where they're just yelling out days of the week, like, it's hilarious. It's really funny. But it's also a fucking great, like, rock and roll song. And this tempo is just too slow. Like, it feels slower than it should be, but it's also the perfect tempo. And then the guitar solo that Greg does, I've always kind of thought, like, it's almost like avant-garde Joe Perry. Like, if Joe Perry was brought into a studio and they, like, played him a backing track and they were like, do something nuts, I feel like this is what he would come up with. So I don't know why I've always thought that, but literally since 93, I'm like, wow, this is Joe Perry attempting to play, like, weird atonal punk rock music. And that would be pretty cool if that actually ever happened. Kind of like Steve Vai on Public Image Limited's album. You know, they just didn't let him hear it. They were like, off you go. Like, we're hitting play and record now. So anyway, and then we get into Best One Yet. And is Best One Yet, Best One Yet, yeah. So this is the first of two. And again, boy, you can really tell. The first of two co-writes between Henry Rollins and Kira. So Kira is getting songwriting credits here. Now, Kira writes music, of course, but Kira is also a lyricist. She has some lyrics on the last Minutemen album, Three-Way Tie for Last. Best One Yet is very sort of gang chant. And it sounds very sort of, the chorus sounds very kind of Man Machine. It's very spit polished, again, and it doesn't have any particular edges or angles that are all that fascinating. So I like the song because Kira's great and Henry's great, but this is probably up to this point my least favorite Black Flag song. Because it's fine. There's little moments of it that are interesting, but again, the chorus is very. I feel like the chorus is prototypical of what a lot of like epitaph bands started sounding like in the 90s. But then we get Modern Man, and Modern Man is a song that originated in the band Worm, Dukowski's pre-Black Flag band. And Ed Dankey co-wrote it with him. And there was a version of this on the 1982 demos that is beautiful. However, this is 85 Black Flag was a very different animal than 82 Black Flag. And I like this version. They turn what had been the intro into an intro and outro. So the song is now bookended by that sort of opening, very kind of Sabbath-esque slow intro, which is just on its own a really beautiful piece of music. The song, though, is outstanding. It's a great critique of American culture. I love the song. It's inevitable. It's inevitable. There it is. So yes, hello, honey. So, but again though, it has all these sort of odd little moments of kind of sonic, I don't know, sonic subspace that, like Bill's quick little drum fills before they go into Living Tomorrow Is Everyone's Sorrow. So it's interesting how differently Kira handles it than how Chuck handled it. It's a lot more, I don't know, she busier parts, I guess. But so it's very, very good. Rollins sings it really well. It's a great song, but I do prefer the 82 version. There is I don't know. Yeah, it's slightly staid compared. Now, and I had this for years before I knew about the 82 demos. And I always loved the song, and I would put it on mixtapes if I was trying to get people into Black Flag. So, it's great on its own, but if you've heard the other version, that's the one, And that is the end of side one, and then we get into side two. And side two is I like far better on this record. It sounds like I don't like this record, but it's more that when I listen to this record, I think about it as opposed to just go on a kind of take the trip, take the journey with it, But side two is interesting because Rollins writes lyrics from almost all of it. And there is, so as he was writing these obsessive sort of psychodrama scenarios in his diaries, a lot of that shows up in the lyrics here. And some of the lyrics almost feel a little bit like a writing exercise. Like he was learning how to write. And I don't know if this point he had already contacted Hubert Selby or not, but I know that he was reading, he was really big on Henry Miller, and there is this kind of psychodrama / diary quality to his lyrics that is a little bit like, this is maybe an odd comparison, but if you've ever listened to is it the Great Southern Trendkill? I think that's the Pantera record, where almost all the lyrics feel like they're just sort of happening inside Phil Anselmo's head. Like it's just this kind of self-dialogue that's running all the time. Or another comparison would be Ice-T's original Gangster album. Though that is slightly different, where it feels like he's just sort of talking to somebody. Like, it feels like it's 2 a.m. and he just sort of can't stop spilling his thoughts out to this person that he's sitting next to. This record has a bit of a quality of that you're just kind of in this person's mind and they can't get out of their mind, if that makes any sense. First song is This Is Good. Greg wrote the music, and Henry's on the words. This Is Good is another kind of like Swingin' Man. This is another weird, what the fuck is this? For years, for about 2 years when I first got this record as a teenager, this was overwhelmingly my least favorite song because it just sounded so wrong to me. As time went by, Kira's kind of loping jazz bass runs really made a lot more sense to me, and I started to appreciate Greg's fucking atonal guitar stabs. Again, the stabs are more free floating sounding. They're not these sort of deranged. There's not the deranged roiling quality of what they were from 82 to 84, but Henry, the lyrics are, again, very, you're in this person's world as they are having some sort of psychotic break. And I think that all the vocal layering on this one really works effectively. Again, it's not as it doesn't have the otherworldly weirdo quality that Spot would have brought to it, but it is effective. And I think the parts of the "to hurt you" where he sounds very like tough guy, I think that works because then it splits back out into the other parts of his psyche. So this is good. It took me a long time to learn how to love it, but I think it's an amazing song. And then we get "I'm the One." "I'm the One" is another song. So that's the second of the Henry Kira co-writes. I guess she was writing the music and Henry's on the words. I mean, that's just kind of my assumption with these. "I'm the One" is very similar to Best One Yet in a lot of ways. And, for, I don't know, the first year or two I had this record, those two songs were kind of interchangeable to me. But "I'm the One" I actually really, really like. I love Greg's guitar part, or parts, because it moves around a lot and it has a lot of tiny little sections. And I think that I love how Greg plays it, for lack of a better way of saying it. I love the feel of it. And Rollins's lyrics are really interesting because, I know that he would go on these long runs with Bill Stevenson, and they would wind through like the hills of Los Angeles. And and he wrote a lot about the desert, and he talked about the meat puppets being from the desert in Arizona. And this really has the feel of that, and the bright bleached sound quality really fits that. So that the vibe of the dark person being shoved into the endless sky-wide sun and having to deal with it, that really comes together beautifully on this song. Whereas sometimes those, on Bastard in Love or on Best One Yet, those things sort of feel at odds. The juxtaposition works really beautifully. And I just think it's very, very believable. And, when he says, like, "my death trip has just begun," you kind of believe it because it's kind of inexpressive in a way, and it doesn't have the explosive quality of the last couple records. It feels like someone who has turned inward, and all of what has been explosive is now aimed at oneself, and they're not coming back from this. So again, it's very, very believable, and I find the song, captivating. And then we get into Sinking, and is this... Yeah, it's Greg. Again, Greg's music on this. So it's interesting how Greg is writing both the most conventional material and the most abstract material. So, like I said, I figured This Is Good was him. So it's interesting that, he's coming up with This Is Good and Sinking, but also Annihilate This Week in Bastard in Love. So Greg's writing is, Greg's music writing is it's a study of contrasts. Sinking is another kind of almost jazz, or certainly from Kira's perspective, she plays it how a jazz player would play it. And this is the one that I think feels the most like a writing exercise. Like Rollins, it feels structured in a way somebody a couple years into writing would be trying to move words around and sort of think in terms of almost like mathematical equations. I love this song. Again, it's extremely believable. This feels like if this whole album has been out in the sun, then now it's dusk. Now it's getting to be nighttime. But it, like This Is Good, just the quality of this person just staring into the mirror, like, and that's what the song is. it really feels like that. And again, it's so inward, and it's all, it is implosive expression. And Greg's playing is interesting in that there's almost, when he takes a few solos, and it almost feels uplifting, or like he's trying to lift it up. And I think that also, again, is an interesting juxtaposition for what is a very dark, wallowing, kind of endless hall of mirrors of a song. So, so again, very, very, very compelling, very interesting. So, and then the album ends with the most curious. So this has been a curious album, a strange album, an album that flirts with conventionality and then goes down some very odd, idiosyncratic paths. But now we come to the most idiosyncratic path of all, and that's the last song on the record, Now She's Black. Now She's Black, written by Bill Stevenson. Song begins with a long drum solo. Not drum solo, drum beat. And Greg doing some, I guess what you would just call straight metal riffing. And it's interesting, the sort of more metal riffing on this record, the Annihilate This Week to the beginning of Modern Man to this, is kind of one of the through lines. So the Rollins diary and Rollins staring in the mirror, and then the occasional metal riffing. And Greg is great at it. His guitar, for the first time on the record, really sounds like it's downed power wire self. And Kira is in there too, of course. And they just, it sounds like what it is. It sounds like people who have played hundreds of hours of music together. And so it's a great, fascinating intro, because it's so stark. And then, Kira kind of goes off into her bass runs, and the song explodes. And, I've wondered over the years, the first couple times I heard the song, I was like, is it like that he has a black girlfriend? Is that what this is? But I don't think that that's what it is. I think that, and we'll see this on the next record, I think Bill, I don't want to read too much, but there is an interview from around this time too. I think Bill had, I don't know, maybe kind of an not obsession, but like an interest in the occult, or an interest in spiritual matters, and was maybe, there's almost like a master of reality kind of vibe to some of the stuff that he writes and talks about in this period, where staring into the darkness and then being like, no, I don't want to do that. Like playing with a Ouija board and then getting giving the Ouija board away to somebody else. Like, I don't want that. I don't want that anywhere near me. There is sort of a quality to that. So I don't think that and I've seen a couple people call this song bad words, because they think that it's like a race thing. I really don't think that it is. But I do think that it's about, dealing with forces that one shouldn't be dealing with, or an interest in or attraction to something that you shouldn't be doing. So the song is amazing. Henry, it's really the only time on the record that Henry is kind of really let loose, because again, even syncing in This Is Good, I mean, like I said, like on This Is Good, the vocals are all stacked up, and similar with syncing. It's not so much stacked up, but he's again trying to sing, and at times doing a really, really great job. And like I said, I think tonally he does have, I think he might have struggled a little bit with some of Greg's songs on side one. But this, he's really just unleashed. And this is just a fascinating kind of mini epic of a song. And there's that spoken word part in the middle. Again, make out of that what you will. But then it goes into this, like, kamikaze fucking ending, where the band is really blasting away, and Henry does this sort of, and I don't know if they have an effect on his voice or what it is, but he's got this sort of low pitch screaming that he does that he doesn't really ever do ever again. I don't think he did it really before or again after. And I don't know if it's the way that they have him double tracked. I don't know what it is, or if it's just he only kind of sang like that once. But it sounds remarkably like Kurt Cobain. Like if you think about songs like Dive, or like that kind of pre-Nevermind era of Kurt, like it's surprising. Like, so we all know that they were big fans of Black Flag. I would have to imagine that Kurt was listening to this and tried to mimic what Rollins is doing at the end of this song. Because it is remarkably similar sounding. But it is a weird ending, and it's just such an idiosyncratic song. Again, this sort of, if Good Vibrations was a pocket symphony, right? The term pocket symphony. This is like a pocket. It's like a pocket epic. It doesn't go on for 10 minutes, but it covers a hell of a lot of ground, and it kind of leaves you scratching your head. And it's an odd ending for a very odd album, a very weird, sunshiny, but dark and writhing under the surface album. And there have been times where I haven't been super into this album, and there was a period in the very late 90s where I was like, I actually kind of started to think of it not as a bad album, but as weaker than their other material. I don't think that now, and I haven't thought that in a long time. Somewhere in the late 2000s, I remember. Oh, so yeah, it would have been somewhere in the late 2000s that I bought this. That's right, because I was listening to it. I had this terrible record player that I owned for a brief period, and I was listening to it on that. And I remember listening to it and thinking, why have I dogged this record at times? I love all of these songs, and especially side 2. I was like, side 2 of this album is amazing. Like, what the hell's wrong with me? So, and I objectively like or love every single song on this record. It's just very odd. And I think that it might appeal to people with different musical tastes than it would appeal to me necessarily, as it is not always the singular subjective experience that their albums have been up until this point. So a few months after Loose Nut was released, but recorded concurrently with Loose Nut, was this. Sort of too long to be an EP, too short to be an album. I mean, it's called an EP, but it's a very, very long EP. The Process of Weeding Out, and it is all instrumental. I did not see, I never saw a copy of this. This was the last Black Flag release that I ever got. And I would have gotten this maybe in the early 2000s when I found it at a record store somewhere. So this was very exciting. I've kept it in its original plastic because I thought it was pretty cool. I normally don't do that with records. One of my viewers commented upon that offline. Hi, David. And the reason why I never kept the plastic was that was a custom started by my father, who had a pretty decent record collection. This one, by the way, Solid Gold Party Rock, is from my dad's collection. It's one of my first, and America's Top Rock. These are two. Those are two specials of my dad, or from my dad. He probably would have got those in mail order in like 82, 83. Anyway, but my dad would never keep plastic on the records because the adage back in his day in the 60s was that keeping the plastic on the records shrinks or screws up the cover. So he always would, as soon as I would buy a vinyl album as a child, he would say, get the plastic off of there. So that has just stayed with me all these years. Now I know that what David was talking about is getting the really nice Super Pro slip cases, but and maybe I need to upgrade to that. But at any rate, this is the artwork, beautiful kind of ominous artwork. Pettibone, I don't know sort of what the story of this was. I don't know if this was already in the pipeline, but there's nothing on the runout grooves. The very brief liner notes by Greg that's the only talking done on this thing, and it features. So this is deep in the Satanic Panic era, and I have faith in record stickering. This was the Tipper Gore hearings with Zappa and Dee Snider and John Denver. I have faith that cop types, with their strictly linear minds and stick to the rules mentality, don't have the ability to decipher the intuitive contents of this record. So there you have it. You could also probably guess by the song titles. Even though this was recorded concurrently with Loose Nut, it doesn't sound particularly like Loose Nut in that the guitars aren't as sort of, I don't know, symphonic or multi-tracked. This tends to be a more raw live band recording. Also, Kira's bass just sort of sounds better. It doesn't have the sort of weird, again, buffed orange sound of that record. The sound of this record is far more appealing, I think, and has more Black Flag-ness, and Greg's guitar sounds more like Greg's guitar as opposed to, I don't know, a massed chorus of rock guitars occurring somewhere in the stereo picture. So I don't know that, process of weeding out are they weeding Henry out? I don't know. I have a hard time. I have a hard time buying that because Henry was so sort of intrinsic to the band. There is an interview that Rollins did around this time or just after this would have been recorded that is somewhere out on YouTube. I've seen it before. That he's interviewed by this like Mark Goodman lookalike, and it appears to be in a public library somewhere, and Rollins is talking about, so Greg famously, huge Grateful Dead fan, huge Deadhead, wrote some rock critic had reviewed a Dead show and said, oh, I don't think, fans of, like super hip bands like Black Flag wouldn't be caught dead here or something like that. Greg wrote to the newspaper saying how the Dead are his favorite band. And this is like 84, 85. So anyway, Rollins had gone to see the Dead, and he talks about, it's a really interesting interview because in it he talks about how how much he admired what the Dead were doing in terms of the band not playing like pre-programmed music and the ebb and flow. I think he uses the word seeing the music, hearing the music breathe, I believe was the way that he phrased it. And he says, interestingly, that he, in the same way that the Dead had gone on for years and years, he says that he can see the Black Flag going on for 10 or 15 more years, and that's what he wants to happen, and he wants the band to continue to evolve and challenge itself. So I think Henry was always kind of, and he's always been very, very respectful of Greg's playing and Greg's artistic vision. So I don't think that the title is a anti Rollins thing. I think that's bullshit that people tell themselves. There's a certain, and I mean, I think this is in all circles, but among fans of rock music, sometimes there is a bit of a sewing circle vibe. It gets a little weirdly catty sometimes. And I think sometimes people reduce the bands they love or the artists they love down to some of their own mentality. And, I don't, especially now, there's a tendency to treat art as if the artist or the art has no ideas that you've never thought of. And there's a real condescension among the critical class that certainly existed back then, but has now really ossified to the point where they act like they are clergy sometimes, and they shall make or break you. So anyway, but Rollins, I think the band could have continued to exist. I think that a lot of what he wound up doing with Rollins' band kind of was an extension of this vibe far more than Damaged. I remember somebody talking about Joe Strummer in his later years, and kind of, or maybe it was an interview with Strummer, and they were sort of pointing out that like the first, like the early Clash compared to the rest of his output is kind of an anomaly. So the thing that he's most known for is kind of an anomaly given the type of artist that he wound up being. So it's interesting to note that. And I think that this is part of, it's indicative of a lot of what I love about Black Flag, that it really is this art project, and it really is this weird amorphous entity that is far more omnivorous than it's given credit for being. Creatively omnivorous, ideologically omnivorous, you, the listener, can take that and extrapolate that out into, if you want, political things, or into the spiritual realm, or all sorts of stuff. That's, as you sort of go on your Black Flag journey, again, like a lot of great art, it gives you the world. So this gives you a lot of time to think and contemplate. And it's really, really, really beautifully realized. By the way, this is not the old school full-on pull-out. I would have to find one of those. After August 1st, 1985, this catalog is expired. But there's a whole Raymond, the Pettibone ghetto. Like, look at all these selections of Raymond Pettibone. Isn't that amazing? So you can pause, but this is what the SST catalog looked like in =85. By the time I came around, it was quadruple this size. So anyway, what's interesting though is that a lot of this really is vehicles for Greg soloing. Some of the germs of what you hear on Armageddon Man are far more fully fleshed out here. Bill's playing, when Bill sort of is playing more sort of percussion-y, kind of free parts, he's really good at it. I think because Bill's a songwriter, and Bill's a musical thinker, so even though he's not a jazz drummer, he can come up with interesting little parts kind of on the fly, and he's just really good at that. So, Bill tends not to do that in the rest of his musical life. Be cool if he did, because he has a talent for it. And then there's Kira, and Kira is all over this thing. Kira is all over this thing in a way that there really isn't room for Henry. I don't think that, I don't know what Rollins would have done on here. This is this is properly a trio. And I love that Greg didn't go nuts with overdubbing himself into oblivion, and making it sound like a fucking can of soda. It's, the au naturel audio verite quality of it suits it very well. What's interesting though is that Kira doesn't really solo all that much. There's little parts where she can breathe, to use Rollins's word, but her bass sound is awesome on this, and she is all over it in a really beautiful way without soloing particularly or like duetting with Greg or going toe to toe with Greg. She is kind of a middle ground between Bill holding it down and Greg's like going off into the stratosphere. There is a compositional sense to these. So your last affront, for instance, Greg, the first sort of third of that is this big wind up, and then it kind of goes into the main part of the composition, and then there's sort of a falling apart, distended last third of it. Screw the Law is your last affront is about 10 minutes. Screw the Law is like 2.5 minutes. It's a shorter, compact, just really cool instrumental piece. Then the title track, The Process of Weeding Out, which is on Live 84. Amazing. Probably the single best composition from this whole period in its ability to weave in and out of the theme and then launch into more soloing. There's some good kind of riffing. And then Southern Rise, which ends it, which really Kira is basically playing like a Southern boogie riff. And Greg is playing over that. So it's very, very cool, very creative. This is a big part of what I love about them. And, the willing to take risks. And sometimes, Armageddon Man is showing how they got there. And, some of the stuff on Family Man isn't as fully realized, but it leads to things like this. And, you don't have this without that. So this is a really cool release. I think anybody who's interested in jazz music or even prog or avant-garde music or what's the word, jazz fusion, sort of any of that jam bandy kind of stuff, I could see people really liking this, and I could see people who are into Zappa liking this. So this is, it's punk in its own way, right? And Mike Watt, punk is whatever we say it is, right? So a really, really cool, creative, interesting record. And this is the kind of thing that I love about Black Flag and is important to me about them. So, all right, moving on. We now finally come to what is the real last Black Flag album. There is The Thing from 2013. I'll address that later, but this is the final album. Like, let's deal with, let's deal with the spirit of the law as opposed to the letter of the law, shall we? I've only ever owned this. This would have been a spring 1993 purchase. In my head, recorded, according to Wikipedia, little parts of this were recorded in '84, but then and then the rest of it was recorded kind of in the same lockout period as Loose Nut and The Process of Weeding Out. If that's the case, that is very confusing, and I guess it has to be the case, but just. It's very odd. So what we have, I shouldn't have put that away. We have a lot of kind of deconstructed individual pieces from Raymond Pettibone. So, and I have somehow gone this many hours without saying that what Raymond Pettibone might be most famous for, in addition to being a very famous fine artist in his own right over the last few years, is Goo. You know, the Sonic Youth album Goo? Yes. So it's been memed in a billion different ways and has taken on a life of its own. That guy. But you probably have already put all that together or already knew that. Internet's a weird place. Who would have imagined that Goo would take on this strange life of its own and be used in a million different ways? So at any rate, but this is just sort of a series of, so from what I understand, they just sort of cut together a bunch of Pettibone stuff and made this artwork. Now, the sequencing of In My Head is a head scratcher. This is a strange album for a lot of reasons. So, in a discography filled with weirdness, this is the culmination of all the weirdness. So, as far as its recording, it's appears to be a little here, a little there. It very much feels like its own set of recording sessions, or perhaps two different sets of recording sessions. I'll get into that. However, also, this is, there's a lot of songs here on the CD, okay? And this is how I heard this album. What I found out years later is that the original vinyl release had a truncated track listing. So I duly burned myself a CDR when I found that out. So this would have been mid-2000s. And, I had kind of made my own peace with this record and its strangeness. But upon finding that out, I burned myself a CDR, which is on the other side of this room somewhere, in with all the other billions of CDRs that I've burned over the years. God only knows where it is. But, and boy, the vinyl sequence makes more sense. So I have never seen this one out in the wild. If I did, I would pick it up. Apparently the CD and the cassette were issued with all of these extra songs. We'll get to that. So I am going to be reviewing the vinyl running order, even though I don't own it on vinyl, because I'm going to go so far as to say I think that's what you should be listening to. I think probably the additional songs and where they are added in the running order probably adds to why this is such a confounding and in some cases very polarizing record. What is weird is that this album is one of those records that some rock critics, kind of like in the same way that like let's say like the Beach Boys' Holland is now held up as a masterpiece. Like it got middling to shit reviews or just dismissive reviews for decades, and then it's like, oh, it's amazing. Like somebody decided that it's amazing. And I love that record, but it's there are weird examples of groupthink. There's a lot of those, but the idea that no one had a good word to say for Holland, and now everyone only has good words to say about it, is weird. So I personally have always liked it, but odd stuff. Anyway, there are people who now sort of put this record forward as a great misunderstood 80s underground album. Sure, but it's sort of at the expense of the rest of their albums. It's a very backhanded compliment. It's a way of dismissing the rest of the albums as like failed experiments or something, which obviously I disagree with. So one of the other big things about this record, and you notice it when you first start listening to it, is that Henry's voice is mixed way in the back. Along with the title of The Process of Weeding Out, and because the band broke up the next year, the sewing circle decided that this was Greg's way of keeping Henry in check, and this is, deflating Rollins' ever-expanding ego, and on and on and on. jump forward to Mark Prindle's incredible interview with Kira. As good as he was at reviewing records, his interviews, he got people not in a manipulative way or anything like that, but god damn, there were some revelations sprinkled throughout those interviews that he got. And he interviewed a lot of Black Flag people. So, if markprindle.com still exists, shout out to that. Shout out to him. He was, when he had an active site, that it was invaluable. But Kira, God bless her, and this is kind of like the same thing with Lou Reed's Legendary Hearts, that no, Lou didn't mix it as some weird power move. No, the idea was, apparently, and this is Kira, I guess what Greg said to her, the idea was that Henry would be another instrument in the mix. And I've talked about that I already felt that he kind of was used in that function. But why not? It's interesting. And again, weird, interesting, creative moves. And that's what this band did. That's what they were such geniuses at. Zigs and zags. What the hell is this? Why would you do it this way? Why would you present this material this way? On and on and on. The idea that it would be this conceptual thing that, well, Henry's just going to be in there somewhere is, a lot of people would never, ever, 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 ever have the guts to A, think of that, but B, try to pull it off. I love it. And I love that about them. And I love that, God damn it, the band was all in. they just went with it. And that's what's so cool about them. And that's why this is art, it's art, The outtake scene, or is it at the end of the movie? I don't remember. But in the MC5 documentary where Dennis Thompson has the unloaded gun, and the director is goading him off camera, like, well, why should people care? Like, it's just fucking music. And Dennis Thompson, like, loses it and grabs the gun and is like, no, it's not just fucking music. Dennis is right. It's not just fucking music, And, Jim Morrison, music is your special friend. Dance on fire as it intends, Music is not my only friend, but it has remained with me, and it's probably remained with you if you're listening to 5-6 hours of this. It has to have meant something to you. There's no chancers left by now. So anyway, I guess we will get into we'll just sort of get into this very odd record. And again, I'll be going with the vinyl sequence, so don't get thrown. So I think side one of this record, as it exists on vinyl, is as commanding of an album side as side two of My War, or side two of Damaged. And like, I guess, side two of Damaged, it kind of forms a loosely connected suite of songs that, again, without having a narrative or like specific characters or whatever, you kind of do your own mental math and put it all together. So first of all, the album begins, albums that begin with a fade in, I feel like that's always a good sign. Dylan's extremely underrated album Street Legal begins with a fade in, and there's something about that, like, that always works for me. Like, there's something, I don't know, you're taking command of the sonic landscape that way, in a very dramatic way to me. So I love fade-ins on records. There's just something, like, I don't know. Again, you're in their world now. You're coming into their world, and you are just going to take the subjective journey with the artist and check out what they have to show you. And you aren't just going to Jesus, you aren't just going to bounce around to your favorite songs or something, you know? This is not, as Anthony Bourdain would say, this is not sauce on the side, you know? So the artist made it this way, and you're gonna, blasting concept. You're gonna take what they have to give. So, begins Fade In and Paralyzed. Now, there is, again, kind of like with Family Man, kind of like with Side 2 of My War, kind of like with Process of Weeding Out. This is, again, kind of a formalist experiment on Side 1. So there's the contrast of really, really heavy, kind of Sabbathy riffing mixed against Greg playing high-end guitar melodies. There is a fair amount of multi-tracking of his guitars again. However, I think the guitar tone, it's not the orange buffed sound of Loose Nut. And we're a far way away from the guitar sound of Damaged. I don't know what it is. It's just very idiosyncratic. I don't know what I would even call it or really how to describe it, other than it's just Greg doing what he does at a very, very, very high level. So the melodic runs contrasted with the very, very heavy riffing is the between and betwixt of what he's doing and how these songs are formed. So Paralyzed, and Rollins wrote the lyrics. It's a fantastic song. It then goes into a slightly sped up chorus that's super, super catchy. Greg plays some really cool, again, very high end guitar lines. It has a different effect. It has just such a different effect, though it's similar, but it has a different effect than on Loose Nut, because these feel like more distinct parts as opposed to kind of overlaid interjections. So I tend to prefer this stuff. I keep sounding like, I feel like I'm putting Loose Nut down. I mean, I love Loose Nut. I've listened to it hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. So, I feel like, there's part of me that it's funny because I agree with everything I said because I just said it an hour ago, but I still feel like I'm not articulating that record right. But I also think, well, why would I re-record it? Because I don't disagree with any of it. But I hope you understand. Like, by all means, listen to Loose Nut, and and if you're somebody, again, if you're coming into Black Flag world and somehow you've watched all of this and you haven't heard them, and you're coming to it from maybe more mainstream kind of stuff, that could very well be your album, So anyway, Paralyzed just has a great chorus. The solo is really weird and creative, and just a kind of phantom floating over the top of this thing. And Rollins' lyrics are great. We're very much in the realm of the continuation of the kind of Loose Nut diary, obsessively staring into the mirror sort of thing. Then we go into, and these first couple songs are much shorter. So again, it feels a little bit more Sweet-like. And again, like a lot of their experiments, there tends to be this, which I appreciate as a listener. Again, kind of, it's very formalist. So you're dealing with clearly delineated shapes, and then when they start fucking with things, you notice, and you can do the mental math and compare and contrast and wonder why, and hence you wind up listening hundreds and hundreds of times. So we go into The Crazy Girl. This and the next song are super duper obviously all Greg. Right. Henry doesn't really write lyrics like this. Paralyzed is another, loping guitar line, and then it goes into these really, really cool double speed breaks, and the band sounds awesome. Like, the band really, really, really nails it, and they're just, again, because of hundreds of hours of playing music together, maybe thousands of hours, they just sound, like one perfect unit. Also, the other thing I should say about this, they really get Kira's bass right on this record, and so to hear her bass sound mixed such a way that in a rock context, as opposed to the experimental jazzy stuff on Process of Weeding Out, it's very satisfying to hear her, because she really has her own sonic space, and you could really hear what she's doing. And I don't want to say that she's doing like necessarily full on counter melodies, but she is, how do I phrase it? She's not doubling the guitar particularly. She's sort of halfway between what Greg is doing and just totally going off on her own and doing full counter melodies. So she fills the space with a lot of interesting runs, and they're kind of, it's almost like what she's doing are implied melodies as opposed to doing like what, let's say, McCartney would do, So I really, really love her playing here. This is some of her best work. Overall, her best work probably is Process of Weeding Out, because that's when she has like the most sonic space, and she kind of has the most room. But this is right up there. Like, she's really awesome on this. So Paralyzed is, again, just really interesting from a songwriting standpoint, and Henry's voice being mixed in the back, and especially like on this song, like what Spot achieved and the sort of shadowy vocal effects of Loose Nut, that's all taken to kind of like the logical extension. So Rollins and his sonic space is sort of nothing but shadows and nothing but nothing but contrasts. So his voice on this, even though you at times can barely hear him, he's very much a commanding presence. So, and then we get into, and then there's Black Love. The guitar breaks sort of double up as where the high-end melodies would be. Rollins is, again, all the different vocal parts that they amassed for him are really amazing. And part of what was so interesting about what Spot did is it's very different than what Spot was doing, like on My War, where it was all it was like seeing all these different parts of a scene of a large spanning vista. This is a lot more boiled down and singularly focused. So that's also a really interesting contrast. So I love how that works. And so each of these songs are weird compositionally. There's a lot happening for 2.5 minute songs. And then that builds to White Hot, which Rollins is now back on the lyrics. Again, I feel like you can really tell White Hot are very much Henry lyrics. But this is where we get the sort of choral vocal parts that will become a feature of this album and the songs that I talk about a little bit later. They're used very effectively. Again, Greg's sort of like metal riffing is awesome, and he's just really, really, really good at it. He's really good at just coming up with riffs. But then he's so sort of creatively hyperactive that he can't help but go off in all of these other places. So this is one of the longer songs. It's about 5 minutes, but it's been sort of building, these smaller, more idiosyncratic compositions kind of build to this longer form, trudge through the dark night. If Loose Nut, or maybe a better way of saying it, if Loose Nut is the dark person forced to be out in the daylight. This is like California during a storm. It's what is normally sunny. No, it's just been raining, and there might even be landslides or catastrophic things happening, you know. That's sort of what this record is. You know, it's muddy and dirty, and you know, there are only dark clouds where the sun should be. Maybe that's the sound of this record. So all of this builds to the title song and the last song on the vinyl sequence of the album, and that's In My Head. First of all, Henry's lyrics are perfect. They're again very much continuing off a Loose Nut, obsessive, singularly focused, and because of his vocal delivery, extremely compelling, and the weird, undermixed, whispery, shadowy edge. So as opposed to trying to get him to sing more on Loose Nut and stacking his vocals up, this is him kind of unleashed in a different way. And he sounds unself-conscious and very, very comfortable singing these songs because he can really command them. So Greg's songs don't he doesn't have to inhabit the character in a Daltrey to Townsend kind of way. He can more project as himself. But In My Head, as a rock and roll song, as a whatever song this is, a heavy metal song, a punk song, I don't know. We're long outside of categories by this point, right? This is an absolute masterpiece. This is one of the best songs the Black Flag ever wrote. This one's for the ages, and coming as the capper, and the logical extension of all of these other songs building up to this on side one. It's just absolutely incredible. Greg's guitar melody is one of the best melodies of all time. This could have been a sea shanty from the 1850s. This could have come over from Europe in, the 1600s and been passed down. This is, as much as it's heavy and dark and you could say metal or post-punk or whatever, it also sounds ancient, and it also and timeless, and it's just an absolute classic. And again, the contrast between the riffing and the guitar melody parts it's the perfect distillation of these ideas. And Henry again sings it for the ages, and it's dark, it's menacing, but it's also extremely vulnerable because he knows these thoughts are wrong, and he's trying to deal with it, and he's trying to figure out how to get to the next day. So these are core human problems for the people who have these kinds of problems. So it's very, very beautiful stuff because it has the guts. It has the guts to stare into the face of the void and to not let the void transform you. So, very serious, very beautiful, very important. So, that's the theme. Then we kick it over to what should be side 2. There are 2 songs on the CD. But we'll talk about those later. We're just going to go straight to side 2. Side 2 of the CD. And that, of course, is... And did Henry write the lyrics to this? You bet your ass he did. It sounds like him. Drinking and Driving, Greg on the music. Greg, kind of like Loose Nut, kind of like Bastard in Love, Greg can write, who knew, sort of poppier, catchy stuff. And he's really, really good at it, In another band's hands, Bastard in Love could have been like a hit. and he's just really good at this. And this, in fact, they did a music video for, and it's a perfectly decent mid '80s music video, especially given that they did it on a budget. Because they had to, because it was SST. So this song is interesting because I have heard, I don't know if it's true, but I have heard whispers that what this song is actually about, and I talked about this band in the last video, is this is actually their response. I know Henry was a fan of Hanoi Rocks, that this is actually a response to Vince Neil killing Nicholas Razzle Dingley in a drunken car wreck. So, and that's what prompted this song to happen. I don't know if that's true or not. I've never seen that confirmed. But if that is true, it certainly provides an interesting emotional backdrop to the song. Greg's guitar solo is amazing on this. His riffing during the, I guess, what would it be? I don't know. What part of the song would you even consider to yourself that this is cool and make sure that you have no choice? And so I guess that's the chorus. Because the reason I trouble with that is because the drink, don't think is also the opening sort of refrain. So what's the chorus and what's that I'm slightly mystified by, but it is it's interesting because it's, whereas Greg has had critiques of whatever conformist culture, etc. Rollins writing specifically about that. He does it in a far more linear way, and whereas songs like Six Pack, and even Thirsty and Miserable, there's sort of a satirical edge. TV Party, there's no sort of satire in Rollins's lyrics. They're just far more direct, and you don't have the layers of what are they really saying, or so the other thing I will say about this is, as much as I've praised Kira, I actually think this is Bill Stevenson's best drumming on any other albums. I think this is his best work, and in particular, again, during the what could be the chorus, simply his hi-hat work is awesome. And that's it's one of those things, I don't know if you ever isolate specific parts out when you're listening to music, but you can do that just with Bill's parts on this song. Really, really, really wonderful. So the song is, a little 80s in its earnestness, and a little smug, and but I'm willing to deal with that. I'm not super fazed by that, because I came of age in the late 80s, early 90s, and there was a lot of earnestness. So, I can hang in there with that. And then there is Retire to 21. Now, the rest of this, is this all Greg? Yeah. So as a lot of side 2 is Henry talking, side 2 of this is Greg talking. And Retire to 21 is... So what I will say for the next few songs, all of which have Greg's lyrics, and he's obviously writing the music because no one else is going to write like this. The idea that this was supposed to be, that this was originally going to potentially be instrumentals, I don't know if that's totally true. And that they decided to add Henry because there was space for him. But what I will say is these songs, the lyrics are, by Greg's standards, very, I will say, indifferent. I'll be generous and say indifferent. They are a little underwritten, and they go kind of for easier rhymes, and they all kind of have they're all sort of they're all kind of, I don't even know how to put it. They're kind of misanthropic, anti-mainstream culture songs that aren't necessarily that pointed. Like in the early 90s, like there would be like on Public Enemy records or Boogie Down Productions or Ice-T or Ice Cube, there would be like the songs at the beginning of the record that were almost kind of like mission statements, and they would mention a bunch of different topics. And so there'd be like a line or two here about police brutality and a line or two there about whatever. But it wasn't necessarily specifically about one thing. It was more about, kind of asserting what the album was going to be or what they're about this year or what have you. Again, mission statement. These are similar in that they just kind of shoot out in a lot of directions lyrically, but don't necessarily commit to one idea, like, let's say, Drinking and Driving does. So, Retired at 21 is, they're all just kind of generally like anti-authority songs. But again, they feel sort of underwritten. Or they feel like they were written quickly. Lyrically, I'm talking, not musically. So, but Retired at 21, what I will say is it has an absolutely phenomenal, out of nowhere kind of whiplash inducing, tempo and jazz break. The da 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 da. Like it just kind of comes out of nowhere, and it's really, really, really cool and awesome. The other thing I will say about this song is during the solo section, it sounds weirdly like a normal rock band, other than the fact that Greg is playing like weird Greg stuff. Like, other than that, like the riffing, and because Greg doubles himself a lot on this, it sounds like weirdly conventional to the point where you're like, so are they, again, like, are they making a statement by going into this part? Like, what, like you have to sort of question it, because it's very odd. And then it goes back into like the weirdo jazz break, and then so odd choices. I think that overall with this album, I think that the weird stop-start tempo shifts, odd sections put together, I think that they, by this point, had really mastered it, and you just kind of accept it in a way, especially the songs on side one. You just kind of accept that this band just arranges their songs in a very strange way. So anyway, then we get into Society's Tease, big goddamn 6 or 6.5 minute song. Society's Tease opens with one of the most like banging, again, Sabbath riff sections. Just the band playing with everything like you could picture them playing it, like just throwing themselves completely into it, and then it kind of launches off into really, really, just really great, for lack of a better way of putting it, just great riffing, and the band just playing perfectly together. And then Rollins is over the top of that, but again, very quiet, like just another instrument in the mix. The lyrics, again, kind of generally obsessive, anti-authoritarian. It talks about driving. This was a song that I used to have on a tape that I would play a lot in my car. And, when you have a lot going on in your mind, and you're feeling a bit misanthropic yourself, or you've been going through kind of a weird phase about virtually whatever, this is the perfect background because the vocals and the indirect lyrics allow you to think about whatever it is that you're thinking about. So you can project into this in a way that you normally wouldn't with something this heavy and this intense. I've always loved this song. I had a friend who was older than me. This is way back. This is 30 years ago. Who only knew Rollins and did not like Rollins, and I kind of had. And he was like, "Well, play one song, like convince me." And Society's Tease was what I played him, and he did not care for it. He said, "I got friends who are doing stuff way cooler than this," and I decided to call his bluff. I was like, "All right, like, who are these friends, man? Like, please tell me, because I would love to hear their records." Oh, but they don't have any. That's right. So, and none of them ever fucking did. So, here we are, 30 years later, and I'm still listening to In My Head. So, and you know, some of those people are trapped in theirs. So anyway, yeah, Society's Tease is amazing, and just again, this just weird gray, implosive record. There was once a bootleg trading website. I think it still exists in some form, but they had very detailed reviews. They were very classic rock focused. So if you wanted Beatles and Rolling Stones, you came to the right place. But there was a weird little group of people, a bunch of them from Australia, who would trade like the Sex Pistols and some other punk bands, and I got a few cool bootlegs via that. But I wrote a review of Black Flag's last show, and I was saying, because it's very In My Head heavy, I said in there that the versions on this album, that this is the cold, dead earth. That's what this is. It's the cold, dead earth. And that's maybe the contrast. Muddy landslide weather contrasted against the cold, dead earth. And that's what this... If that sounds good to you, then this album is right up your alley. And then it ends with It's All Up to You. So It's All Up to You it opens, again, kind of like the guitar break on Retired at 21. It just sounds like really weirdly conventional. It sounds so like normal. The mass choral vocals, and you have the indistinct anti-authority / I'm going crazy lyrics. I really like the song, but it's an odd ending, and I do sometimes think that Society's Tease would have been a more definitive ending of the record. There is a solo on this song that I think is absolutely incredible. And I think is one of Greg's best solos. But it is, it's a very eccentric way, in a very sort of non-definitive way, of this album just sort of coming to an end. And that's really kind of how it feels. It just sort of comes to an end. Unlike even Loose Nut ends with the full-on of Now She's Black. This just sort of ends, and you say, oh, okay, cool, interesting, but I don't really know what to make of it. And so that's kind of, side two. I think it's really creative, and I really respect it, but I don't have as much of like an emotional connection to it. It's just a very odd record. The CD sequence is even odder, because then it ends with one more song that is even more of a head scratcher. So I sometimes wonder if maybe they, even though the vinyl sequencing is better than the CD sequencing, I do wonder if, making your own sequence of this record is not a bad idea, because it's an odd duck, and especially given how commanding the first side is. So that's in my head. This came out in October of '85. So in 1985, the band lost Bill Stevenson, and that was a calamitous loss, I think, because Bill, had started asserting himself as a songwriter. I mean, Now She's Black is the album closer, and it's one of the best songs on that record. He was helping to mix the records. He was doing at least a certain amount of the graphic design of the records. So, Bill played a lot of roles in that band, and losing him was very significant. Obviously, the biggest loss, though, was as a drummer. They replaced him with Anthony Martinez. Now, there are people out there who I have seen who are big fans of Anthony Martinez. I believe Greg said that Anthony Martinez was their best drummer. I will, and I don't want to be disrespectful or step on anyone's toes, this is the first time that they have had, to my mind, a significant musical downgrade. They got around the loss of Chuck Dukowski by getting Kira, who did something completely different. And they got around the loss of Chuck Biscuits by getting Bill Stevenson. They got around the loss of Robo by eventually getting Chuck Biscuits. They got around the loss of Biscuits by, So, and then, the singers, I think each of the singers was able to take on more. Given that Dez would blow his voice out, I don't think Black Flag could have done 90-minute sets every night for 100 days, basically. I don't know that they could have toured as hard. I don't know that they could have toured the way they did doing those types of shows, even with Keith in the band. I don't know. I think that there's a certain amount of evolution with the singers and with the drummers. And then, there had only been one switchover in the bass player, which, could have ended the band, but didn't, thank God. This, however, was the first time they had a drummer who just couldn't do what the other guys had done before. The other problem is the other drummers definitely, Brian Migdal even, but Brian Migdal, Robo, Chuck Biscuits, and Bill Stevenson, Emel's just not around long enough, so sorry. All have sonic identity. You know it's them playing, or you can take a pretty damn good guess at it. Same thing with Chuck, same thing with Kira. You know that it's them playing, right? Anthony Martinez could be kind of any rock drummer. He does not have any sonic identity. And so I'm not a fan. So, I had talked about the singers and my favorite, my range of favorites of the singers, but any of them you could make a case for being a favorite. I look kind of sideways at anybody who purports that Anthony Martinez is the best, or even a lateral move as a drummer. It's preposterous. So, on August 23rd of 1985, they played at the Starry Night in Portland. He's already gotten one shout out. Viewer David was there. Hey man. Again, he apparently was there. By the way, I got this I didn't get this until early 95. And it was before Get in the Van came out, and I had never seen a photo of Henry with long hair. So this, my 17-year-old self, this would have been the first time I ever saw Henry with long hair. I thought it was, and Greg with long hair, because I had only ever seen him in The Decline of Western Civilization. So this was pretty mind blowing to me. I also didn't know what Kira looked like, but Kira's barely in here. So this is the live album, again, August 23rd at the Starry Night in Portland, Oregon. This is the live album Who's Got the 10.5, released in 1986. I saw a vinyl version of this once. I did not buy it. Why did you buy it, Rich? Well, I didn't buy it because the extended CD version, this has more songs. It has, I don't know if it's the whole show, but it probably pretty damn well is. So I would just go with more songs. Especially back then, especially as a youth in the CD era, I didn't give a shit about pressings or formats. I wanted, if an album had bonus tracks, I bought the version with the bonus tracks. I mean, I was just interested. I wanted the songs. I wanted the content. That's what was interesting to me. One of the reasons I would buy vinyl was because A, I could buy more of it, because you were considered an idiot for buying vinyl records. But B, a lot of the stuff hadn't been reissued, so you just got it as it was. So anyway, this Who's Got the 10.5? In one of his more recent spoken word concert films, Henry Rollins said that this was his favorite record that ever came out from Black Flag. It's a curious statement. Why this one? Who knows? Who knows? That is truly a head scratcher. But I don't think that this record, given the all sort of consuming aura and sort of ultimate genius level of Live 84, to me at least, this is not that. However, it's still pretty goddamn good. So, if this would be, the live at was it the live at the Isle of Wight compared to live at Leeds, maybe it would be the point of comparison. This is still pretty damn good. What is cool about this record, and what I will touch upon right now, is Black Flag. This is mostly Loose Nut songs, which would have been the current song. And I guess I will get into this. I feel like there are different models that rock bands operate off of. And so there's the Bob Dylan model, which most will never get anywhere near. Lou Reed kind of operated off of that, where the songs kind of are when they go out on tour, the songs are sort of ever shifting, rearranged, take on different personas, and through different tours and different eras, you can explore different aspects of the songs and what the songs are about, right? So Zappa, Reed, Dylan are like that, most bands operate off of they have their course. Well, and then they're the bands that have sort of, they're almost like a show band. So they kind of have a set that's specifically designed for the stage, and that might include some covers or extending certain songs out. You see that a lot, like in rhythm and blues. What I think how most bands operate is they sort of have their core greatest hits, and then they might work in a couple new songs or a cover or two, whatever. And depending on the type of band they are, there might be instrumental solos, whatever. But I think most bands operate off of largely the sort of greatest hits model. But then there is what I call, and the one that I think is the most noble discipline, is what I call the Miles Davis model. And the Miles Davis model is basically you disregard your own history and you are creating new music, or you're going out with new music basically every single time you hit the stage. Or not every time but every tour is basically completely new music and basically a new set. So Miles Davis adhered to that very demanding discipline for decades, and that's part of why I revere him so much as a genius. And that was, challenging music to bring out. So it's this ever moving forward, it doesn't repeat itself. And the Stooges did that, by the time the Stooges were touring Funhouse, they weren't playing songs off the first record. By the time they were touring Raw Power, they weren't playing Funhouse. As it went later on into touring Raw Power, they weren't even really playing Raw Power anymore. They were playing what would have been the next record. There's that really great record from live record from 71, the You Don't Want My Name, You Want My Action, that would have been the third Stooges album, which is largely a set of new material that is just unto that period of time. Husker Du operated off the Miles Davis model, and they made music so quickly that sometimes they were 2 records ahead of the record that they were touring on. I think Prince tried to do it for a while, but it's hard for somebody who's that popular and has had that many hit songs. But I think Prince tried to do that. It's a very difficult discipline, and most people don't try to do that, which is understandable. But Black Flag largely adhered to the Miles Davis model. And so, you basically get a set list that is fairly different than the touring they did in '84, which is really, really cool. So what I will say is, in some respects, especially Bastard in Love, this is vastly preferable, I think, over the studio version, because I think it gets far more to the center of the song. Henry screams his way through all of these songs by and large, but Henry screaming, especially Henry screaming in his higher range, is what he does best. He was kind of the best in the world at it for a lot of years, and that's how he sings, and that's how he emotionally connects with things, and it's how he conveys emotions. So Henry screaming his bleeding head off is, to me, sort of how these songs are supposed to sound. I don't know why they were so hell-bent on trying to get him to just sing and not scream in the studio, because he was a screamer, and he's like he was an amazing screamer. So I feel like you're sort of taking away part of his power by kind of just not letting him do that thing in the studio. So, and I feel like the more they made him sing, the more he had to try to figure out what to do. And so he just gets to exist in his natural state. So I'm the One sounds that much more emotionally charged, and that much more like, oh my God, this guy really is like going somewhere that is scary and very, very, very solitary. Annihilate this week, while it might lose its irony. First of all, by the way, when they go to start playing Annihilate this week, there's somebody in the crowd who goes, "Let's hear it!" And that has played in my head at hundreds and hundreds of times. I've gone to see bands play live when the drummer's like just starting the song. Like, I hear this, whoever the hell this guy is going, "Let's hear it." I hear that in my head. But like Annihilate this week, yes, it might lose some of its irony and some of its cultural critique, but it gains in visceral power is what you want. So, and Bastard in Love, Modern Man, this is good. Sinking sounds amazing with Rollins screaming it out it sounds that much. It just sounds that much more powerful and conveys itself that much better. Also, this is good because it's a live recording. There's a lot of empty space, and you could really hear what Kira's doing, and Kira is awesome. There is an instrumental called, not terribly imaginatively entitled Jam. That's fine. It's not as good as what they were doing in Live 84. I might as well get to it now. Anthony Martinez does two things that bum me out. He does what a lot of what's the default move for a lot of rock drummers of that boom bap at different speeds. A lot of this stuff rhythmically gets kind of boiled down to, and that to me is the equivalent of like what pop punk bands on guitars just chug-a-lugging all night. Like that, I lose interest. I really lose interest with that. So he does that, but then the other thing he does is he gets weirdly overly busy trying to do some like Keith Moon, Mitch Mitchell, Ginger Baker shit. And it's like, you are not that guy. Sorry. That's not what you do, man. Like, I'm sure he would have been great playing maybe in a more conventional band or something, or I don't know. Maybe Greg was encouraging him to do that, or I don't know. Or he thought, oh, this is wild music, so I'm going to do wild shit. Or maybe he was trying to emulate what Bill would do when they would get into freer parts of instrumentals or even different songs. But it's like overly busy. It sounds to me like he misses beats. I just don't care for this. Like, I just don't care for his style. And then when he stops doing all that shit and just sticks to playing the beat, it totally is the boom and bap and boom and bap. And there are a few things less interesting to me than boom and bap and boom and bap for fucking repeat ad nauseum. So sorry if anybody who's a big fan of his. I just have no interest in it. One of the funny things about Rollins on this record is, and I don't know if you don't like Henry Rollins, this is not where you want to start, because Rollins was really, how do I put this? Really feeling himself on this particular night. He was having a good night, and there's a lot of vocal interjections, and then there's a certain amount of extemporizing, and there's a certain amount of winding the crowd up, especially as they get into a 15-minute medley of Slip It In and Gimme Gimme Gimme, which is, he goes kind of into this rap where you get the title of the record. It's a dick joke, and not a terribly good one. So, yeah, and Rollins doing the kind of Nig Heist sexual weirdness shit, or the stuff that like Greg would do, but in his own Rollins way. Yeah, I don't know. He's just maybe not as good at it. I think he wants to let it all hang out, but he's Henry, so he can only let it all hang out in certain ways. And sexual anarchy weirdness is maybe not one of those ways. It's a little odd. I mean, I'm not offended by it or anything, but yeah. So it's and then he extemporizes a lot during the last song, Louie Louie. So what's interesting though is this is the sort of thing, not the sexual weirdness part, but the extemporizing over the band going full speed, that again he did a lot in Rollins' band, and sort of treating himself like an instrument, right? And he was really good at that. in Rollins' band. But you know, these are the early versions of that. So you know, it's sort of like, you know, younger photos of yourself, perhaps. So yeah, if you aren't into him or aren't into his vibe, I would suggest don't start here. But if you're okay with that, then, you know, by all means, go forward. I think what's interesting is you can very much see when he starts getting into, like, saying, like, I am the discipline and stuff like that, when he starts, like kind of revving himself into that, you know, I think that is maybe, and we'll get into this soon, maybe what Black Flag could have evolved into. But I just don't think that it was going to happen, and I'll get into that more specifically. I just don't think that was going to happen with Greg kind of running the show. In other words, I think that they were splitting into kind of like, there's a guy that did a long Black Sabbath review, and he said, towards the end of Ozzy's time, they were morphing into either being an Ozzy band or a Tony Iommi band, and I think that you can kind of almost see that here. Like, there's sort of the Henry way, and then there's the Greg way, and especially now that Bill was out of the band and Kiro was very soon to leave. You know, between the two of them, it was inevitable that it was going to have to go Greg's way. So, at any rate, this is a very good live album, and there's a lot on here to like. And, you know, when I got this in 1995, you know, myself in the spring of 1995 was kind of like Black Flag in 1985. There was a lot of, I was out in the sunlight a lot, and I was not terribly comfortable in that position. So there's on an intuitive level, like when I say that I loved Loose Nut, or love Loose Nut, like I feel like I was in a similar emotional headspace at that time. You know, a coming from being very dark and closed off and trying to open oneself to the world, but not always being very comfortable doing it, and then becoming self-conscious about coming off as disingenuous, and that creating its own sort of internal domino effect. So I related to this record in a very weird way as a young person. So I'm kind of emotionally connected to this era in a way that is probably hard to convey 30 years or 28 years later making a video, you know. But at any rate, all right, so I'm going to try to wrap all this up in one fell swoop. So I'm just going to be consulting a couple quick little notes on my phone. So away we go. So we basically, in September of 1986, Greg ended the band by calling Henry and saying that Greg, was leaving the band. So, and Henry said, but it's your band. So I feel like that ending is the most non-ending ending that is the only way that it was going to end. Kind of like the last song on the last record. Kind of, that's it, folks. So I will quickly run through the postmortem releases. I'm not going to go in a chronological order because it's sort of slightly weird order. So in 1989, SST Records, for whatever reason, God only knows what prompted them to do so, but they put out the I Can See You EP. I saw a copy of this once out in the world. I didn't buy it like a fool. I have it, digitally, so, 3 of the 4 songs are on the In My Head CD version, and then the 4th song I grabbed off iTunes. And years ago. So at any rate, so this is it. These are the final studio recordings Black Flag. And, you know, this would have been the In My Head / Process of Weeding Out / Loose Nut Sessions, I guess. So I'll just go with the songs as they are on In My Head. There's Out of This World, which is a co-write between Bill Stevenson and Kira. It's a really cool, more sort of straight ahead kind of punk rock type of song. Very weird lyrics, though, as I talked about with Bill before. These kind of like there's all this stuff about Lucifer. They're odd lyrics, and Bill had a tendency to write or to reference these sorts of things. So I'm not really sure what all that's about with him. Who knows? But it's a cool song. Henry sings it really well, and it's just this great kind of little straight ahead song that I've always really liked and I think works. Then there is, and we'll do it now. There's Kickin' and Stickin', which on here is 1.5 minutes. The cat is back. Kickin' and Stickin' doesn't stick around long enough to do much. It sounds like it's an excerpt of a longer jam. It's odd. It's okay. You know, it kind of comes off as sort of There is I Can See You, which is all Greg. And I Can See You is, when you hear it, especially on the CD sequence of In My Head, is one of the most baffling goddamn things you're ever going to hear. I hate to use this word because I think in some circles it's an anti-gay slur. I don't intend it as an anti-gay slur. I'm perfectly pro-gay. But it's fruity. It strikes you as fruity in the same way that Maxwell's Silver Hammer is fruity on Abbey Road. It's just tonally, it's really jarring stuff. But it's a weird, light, bouncy song. Rollins doesn't really sound entirely sure of how to tackle it. His voice is kind of multi-track to high heaven. It's a strange one, and the lyrics are almost like, you know, the lyrics are like minimalist poetry or almost haiku or something. Like, it's really odd. It's a weird, bouncy song that is in some ways not bouncy. It's very, very strange stuff. So I've kind of liked the song. What I really like is how it would bum certain people out. So I kind of always appreciated that aspect of it. And then the final song on this EP, which is the last song on the CD sequence of In My Head. So to some people, this would be the last song on the last album. You Let Me Down, which is another weird, Henry wrote the lyrics on this, weird kind of multi-voice track extravaganza. The Henry multi-track / choral brigade of this period. It's an odd creative choice. It's interesting. It's weird. And You Let Me Down is kind of another, but again, it's that same sort of odd, sort of bouncy, sort of dirgy, weird, plinky plonky thing that, you know, it's like a more grounded version of I Can See You, but it's just very strange. And they were kind of pursuing their own, like, weird genre at this point. So yeah, that's the I Can See You EP. Your guess is as good as mine. You know, I can appreciate some of it, and some of it I am truly, truly baffled by. So I'm not going to cover the Minute Flag EP here, because I feel like that's more of a Minutemen release. So someday when I do a video about them, I'll cover the Minute Flag EP. And then there's the Annihilate This Week EP, which came out in '87, but that's just songs that were just on the CD version of Who's Got the 10.5. The cover artwork is absolutely hideous. The You Don't Know Mojack episode goes into detail on the cover, so that's sort of interesting to hear the background of it. But the I Can See You EP artwork is not particularly inspiring either. I'll diplomatically say. What is the date on this? Is it June something of 1986? I've seen conflicting dates, but in Detroit is when Black Flag played their last show. This is a CDR that I burned of that. So I don't know if that's the set list. So going off of the Miles Davis model, this is primarily in my head songs. There's a decent amount of loose nut. There's a couple songs off of older records, not really very many. They do Gimme 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 and Louie Louie. That's about it as far as old pre-My War material. So the last show, so when you read Get in the Van, and the band is like clearly sort of falling apart. They're having to deal with skinhead violence in a way that they hadn't had to deal with since the beginning of the 80s. There were some really weird confrontations that they had that were really, really awful. So things were hard. Dave Markey, who was I think the drummer in Painted Willie, who was the opening act, he eventually made the masterpiece, 1991, The Year Punk Broke, but he made a tour documentary, which I don't know that it was ever officially released because I think Greg put the kibosh on that, but you can find it pretty easily. It's called Reality 86. Really interesting and absolutely well worth checking out. Greg is an interesting figure at this point. Henry's barely in the documentary. At some point, Greg told Henry that he did not particularly like him and did not particularly like being around him. Henry, I will say, appears to have aged like 10 years in 1 year. The Henry of 86 is a guy who's been through a lot. And Greg, especially in Reality 86, presents a very odd figure, because on one hand, and I kind of feel like even at the end of the In My Head album, you can almost hear the contradictions in the band of, the parts at this point are so weirdly delineated that you can it just kind of makes sense that the band was kind of collapsing under its own weight. So Greg had an opening act on this tour called Gone that he was 1/3 of. So Greg, by this point has ditched the utilitarian sort of mailman clothes and certainly doesn't look particularly punk rock anymore. He is now wearing a Gone t-shirt. So he's wearing his own opening act's t-shirt. So it's that and sweatpants. So we're kind of in a whole new era for Greg. So on one hand, the figure he cuts in photos and stuff in terms of Black Flag is miserable, mopey, the band's falling apart. And then with Gone, he seems very excited. The rhythm section of Gone was the drummer Sin Kane and the bassist Andrew Weiss. Andrew Weiss is one of my favorite musicians who ever lived. Andrew Weiss is an unbelievable bass player. He's one of the best that has ever lived. Guitar Player magazine, back when I was becoming a fan of the Rollins band, they did an interview when The End of Silence was out, and they called Andrew Weiss a one-man Black Sabbath, which is a pretty damn good description. I love his playing, and the Rollins band changed hugely after he left. So, but that's the rhythm section of Gone. So Henry eventually jacked the rhythm section of Gone to be half of the Rollins band. So that's kind of also what I mean. There's the Henry band and the Greg band, and the crossover of those things. So, but they also, by this point, by '86, they had lost Kira, and they replaced Kira with bass player by the name of Sal Revuelta. Sal is he the only member who has passed away? He passed away, I believe, of brain cancer a few years ago. It's horrible. Sal, obviously, there's no studio recordings. Sal on stage is perfectly fine. I know Henry was critical of him in Get in the Van. I completely understand that. And there are people who saw those shows who attest that Sal was not terribly good. I would say that Sal is another downgrade from Kira, because I think anything other than Kira after Chuck Dukowski is just too seismic. So yeah, it's as good as he is. I think he's actually very good. I think he's very strong. However, he's just not in the fucking league of the previous two. I mean, come on, nobody could be. You just can't fill those shoes. So the band. It's interesting because the fact that Greg was so obsessed with playing with Gone really highlights, like, that should have been the rhythm section. If Sim Cain became the drummer of Black Flag and Andrew fucking Weiss became the bass player of Black Flag, oh my God, then they could have continued to exist. However, in terms of the Greg Henry thing, could they have existed basically as Rollins' band except with Greg as the leader? No. So it's interesting. I just think that I say that to get to the point that I think that Greg had his eye on the door, and it's just that Sim and Andrew wound up not going with him. But if Greg was thinking all Black Flag all the time, those guys clearly would have been the rhythm section for Black Flag, because they are white hot the way that the other former members of the rhythm section have been white hot. Anthony Martinez, by this point, has figured out his role a little bit better. He's far better on this than he is on the 85 stuff. So fair play to him. This stuff with the cold dead earth meets mudslide of In My Head. This is fucking awesome by comparison. I expected, it was years before I heard this, and you see the mopey photos and you read the endlessly depressing diary entries and get in the van and you just think, God damn, the wheels are coming off this fucking thing. This is, I love this. I was shocked. Maybe it was a case of lowered expectations, but I was shocked at how goddamn great this thing is. I went through a phase when I would have gotten this in the middle 2000s, where this just was in my car for like 2 years. I just played the hell out of this thing. It's a lot, the In My Head songs are alive and electric and exciting, and Henry sings the shit out of them. Kickin' and Stickin', again, could they have continued to exist? Can you imagine Kickin' and Stickin' with Sim and Andrew? Because here, it's stretched out to like a 10 or 15 minute epic fucking jam, and Henry's extemporizing and he sounds awesome. He's really starting to master that shit, and Greg is coming up with crazy, weird, outer space guitar interjections, and they're playing off each other, and Greg doesn't even sound like a rock guitar player anymore. Greg is just purely channeling shit out of the fucking universe, and he is amazing. So there is a lot of awesome music to be found here. Turns out, I found out in getting ready to do this video, Full Metal Archivist, whoever you are, I salute you. God damn it, there's a video of this show. It's not complete. So I forget which songs are, I think This Is Good is not filmed, or, but there's a whole, you can pretty much watch the show. It's really, really cool. Henry is just, he's amazing as a front man. They could maybe have continued, except again, I think the inevitable, is it a Greg band or a Henry band? You couldn't have two heads on the body, and we all know it wound up becoming the Rollins band. So, at some point I am going to review the Rollins band records. I think that they have gotten a bad rap over the years, or they've just been sort of forgotten about to some degree. So at some point I kind of want to do a justice for the Rollins band, kind of reclaiming project, because I think some of those records really deserve it. I think some of them are really, really good. In 87, they put out what I originally bought on cassette. That cassette is long gone. For some reason, I don't know why I felt compelled to buy this many years later on CD, but yet I did. Here it is, the Wasted Again compilation. There it is. The artwork, again, you don't know, Mojack went into detail about the artwork. God bless him. Some notes, I believe, from Greg, that are funny. But this is an odd scattershot release, given Black Flag sprawling body of work. I don't know how this couldn't be a scattershot release. But I loved it as a 14-year-old. So, could it work for you? Yeah, maybe. You could do worse. But in an era of streaming and shit being out on YouTube, I don't know why you would bother with Wasted Again. And then there's the I Can See You EP. Oh yeah, there's the Live on Broadway release from '82, which I've been to talk about before. That release is amazing. That's the Chuck Biscuits, Dez, Dukowski, Rollins, Greg lineup. That is an amazing. Is it 2 concerts? Because the version that I have is 2 shows. So I don't know what the legality of that release is, but it's 82 Black Flag, so it's incredible. And then that's it. That's the band. Eventually they reformed. They reformed once in 2003, and then they reformed later at the end of the 2000s, and continue in a manner that is not fitting with their brilliance. I'll delicately say. You can go see the footage of the shows yourself if you feel so inclined. At best, it's competent, and that's as much as I can say. Henry went on to the Rollins band and as I said before, lived several lives in public. Chuck Dukowski, eventually Swa and Worm ran their course. At some point, I will review those records. He eventually formed in the 2000s, and kind of in the MySpace era, the Chuck Dukowski Sextet. That first record is amazing, which features a really cool re-recording of My War. Dez went on to do a million different things, include playing with the reformed Misfits. Keith Morris, again, he's like Henry, he's now had several lives in public, from the Circle Jerks and then up through Off. He's made a lot of music that's absolutely worth hearing. Ron Reyes, he's done stuff, but I'll be honest, I'm not too familiar with it. I know that he became a born-again Christian. He lives up in Canada. He's, Ron seems like, given sort of his youth, he seems remarkably well-adjusted and very cool. Kira formed the band with her then husband, Mike Watt. The 2 bass players formed the band Dose. Dose is really cool. She's done a million things. She eventually won an Oscar as a sound designer for, I forget which big movie, some big hit movie. And she put out a solo record recently, which is really cool. I've only listened to it a couple times, but it's really, really interesting. And she recently did kind of like a jazz version of drinking and driving. That's pretty cool. So that's like, if you look her up, you find that right away. I'm trying to think of who else. Well, Chuck Biscuits was in Danzig, and then I think he's become a bit of a recluse. Spot is not doing too good. There's a charity that Henry and Joe Carducci and others put together. So that's linked in the previous video, but I'm going to link that again. If you have some money, throw it Spot's way, because he deserves it. He's having, a lot of health issues. Yeah, and I'm trying to think of if I've missed anybody else. And then, and then there's Greg. Greg. I don't really sort of know what to say. Greg's made some cool music on his own, but there's a lot of it, and a lot of it comes and goes. And there was the book, the Corporate Rock Sucks book from, I think his name is Jim Rulin, that came out last year. It's a really interesting book. But, apparently the master tapes of all these different bands are ebbing away. And, it's hate to be a bummer, but I guess this video, like Black Flag itself, will sort of go at the end. So I hope that you've enjoyed all of this. Battery's running out. Got the blinking light. I'm not sure exactly what I might do next. I might do the birds. We'll see. But again, thank you for watching. Thank you for commenting. Thank you for subscribing. It's really gratifying and lovely. And there's some really cool people out there that are checking this stuff out. So I really appreciate it. And, thank you for hanging in there through all of this. So until next time, everybody, bye.